Hello and welcome to the Career Pursuit podcast. Today I'm here with Alan Gomes, a senior recruiter. Thank you for joining me, Alan. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Alex. Thanks for having me here. Good day. Slow weekend, so always nice.
Fantastic. I appreciate you took time out of your busy schedule to connect. Essentially, why I wanted to connect with you is, of course, you're a recruiter in the GTA. Of course, I want to know about your career path because at Career Pursuit we talk about individuals' career path. But I feel like you have a good thumb on the pulse of what's going on in the GTA job market, and you might be able to provide some insights, some tips, some tricks to job seekers and companies looking to hire talent alike. So that's the thought of this conversation today.
Great. Yeah, happy to be here. So yeah, let's get started.
Awesome, awesome. So one of the first things I'm intrigued with is individuals' career path. Kind of, what did you graduate with, and then how did you end up to where you are now? And why don't you tell individuals kind of the position you have and what you do for work in the world of recruiting?
No, fair enough. So it's a long story. I'll keep it short. So basically, I grew up playing tennis. That was always my go-to. Was never really too much into education. Originally from India, I played national level, international level juniors. I was in the NCAA in the US, full scholarship for about a couple of years. Unfortunately, I got injured, so I had to go back, finish my education, go at it all again. I was never planning to come to Canada, but one of my students and I started coaching tennis in the meanwhile while I was in India. So one of my students came to Canada and they're like, hey, you might as well come here and then you can move to the US if you want, right? Like, how easy that is. I'm like, yeah, sure. But I landed in Toronto, I believe December 2013, pretty much when one of the biggest snowstorms hit. Like, that's the day I landed. So that was a good welcome. But I fell in love with the city and I'm like, yeah, it's going to take a lot for me to just move. And I've been here ever since. And so when I moved here, I came as an international student. I was doing sport and event marketing, 1 year post grad program from George Brown. Was a good one. Made sense to me. I connected with some people in Tennis Canada and York University. Everything happens there. So I was still involved with tennis, but I started noticing that I didn't really want to be a coach. I like doing it as a passion, but I wouldn't try to monetize it, and I couldn't see myself, doing that as a full-time gig. And so I started thinking, like, what should I do? Now, give in mind, I'd never paid that much attention to studies. I was a good student. I would,
Yeah.
get through, but I wasn't really into any specific stream. So I'm looking at the job market. I'm looking at things. I'm like, well, this is completely new to me. I have no clue what's going on. I've probably never written a proper resume before. And then one of my friends is like, hey, I just did this HR program. This is something you might be interested in. And that made me click a little. I'm like, jobs will always be a bit challenging to get, irrespective of the economy, good or bad. So I figured I would rather be on the employer side, knowing how things work and how to get good jobs and sort of helping people with that and try to and I've tried, I'm like decently successful in trying to reduce the friction between job seekers and the employers.
Mhm.
And so that's what got me started in HR. I like HR. I think it's a great field. But having played tennis, having always been in front of people, I think I wanted to be more on the people side of it. And that's where recruitment became like a very natural fit. I graduated, did an internship with a small local business. I was doing more HR recruitment for them. And then from there, just one thing led to the other. And now it's been almost 8 years I've been recruiting. Majorly, Toronto, Canada, a lot of US roles in the last, three, like post COVID, a lot of US roles because I did do a lot of tech, building materials, construction, those sort of industries. I've done in-house for the first, I would say, 4 years. And then 3 years, 3+ years now, I've been more on the agency side. So when I came out of the agency, I loved it just because in an agency, recruitment is all you do. Like that's your bread and butter, that's your business. In a corporate gig, it is one of the things that they're focused on. And it
Mhm.
could be a cost center. Like HR, unfortunately, still look at most places like a cost center. So recruitment would tie in with that. So I like the freedom of me being able to focus exclusively on what I like without, I think, a lot of political environment versus in house it can change a little bit, right? So
Yeah.
that sort of brings me to where I'm today. Like I said, doing it for 8 years, hard to see me doing anything else. Other than that, at least be involved with it, until I pretty much decide, hey, I'm not going to work anymore, right? So I'll still be recruiting in some capacity. And yeah, doing I do sales, marketing, engineering roles. Like that's my forte. Industries, like I said, could be tech, construction, building materials, consumer goods. Majority of our clients tend to be small, mid-size. So when I say small, mid-size, and you're looking at about 250 to 1,000 people, revenues anywhere between 25 to 70, 80 mil. We have some bigger enterprise level clients as well who are in billion plus in revenue. that probably makes up a little part of it as well. So that's sort of, where I found my niche, if you may.
Incredible, incredible. I love the journey from, almost kind of considering going professional tennis to injury. Okay, let me coach tennis to understanding, okay, I have the people skills now. Let me get into the recruitment side of things. It's really interesting when someone finds their niche and finds what they're good at. But it takes time. So it sounded like it took some time on that journey. Like throughout that 8 years, you were in-house recruiting. What was the decision to go to the agency side? Was it just the more freedom? Was it being able to double down on your niche? Tell me about the decision to go from in-house to agency.
Yeah, that was a very interesting time because even though I had been recruiting in-house for about 3.5 years at that point, I was still getting started, right? Like it's easy to think you know everything, but once you get started, you're like, oh my God, there's so much to learn. College covers a lot of things, but real life experience teaches you a lot as well. So I wasn't looking to move. Like there was literally no thought. Hey, I was like, you know what? I'm in a decent company. I'll keep growing. We'll see where it goes. I wasn't like planning too much for the future, right? But then out of the blue, I was essentially headhunted to Lock Search Group by Jack. He was one of the senior recruiters I reported to. So when I spoke with him, it made sense. I did my interviews with them. And when I started working with them, I was just blown away. I'm like, this is how recruitment can be done.
Hmm.
And this is the seriousness of it. And it's a good culture. And like I said, some of the pros that came along with it. So that made me switch out off the bat. I'm like, yes, I can go in house again. But I just realized there's a lot of skills I could pick up with a very cool group of people. And I think till date, I'm in touch with everybody I met there. A lot of them have gone their separate ways. Some have their own agencies now. So it's just that entrepreneurial mindset also that really attracted to me versus like, hey, I have 20 recs and I got to fill eight and I'll just keep doing it, until I basically go crazy. Right. So I think that sort of really attracted me and the freedom that came with it. Like
Yeah.
you're still in control a bit, the roles you want to work on, the clients you're working with. Sometimes they might also listen more to you versus they might to an in-house person because you are the expert who's helping them fill a certain role or whatever that looks like.
100%. When you first jumped into the agency side and you got recruited, did you ever have a mentor or anyone kind of show you the ropes or take you like through a journey of really self improvement and you kind of saw any sort of like guiding light?
A lot, actually. I've been very lucky. I always tell people that not just in recruitment, even in tennis, I've had really good coaches, mentors. They just, just the environment I find myself in, right? So I had 4 or 5 people. And back then in office was the norm, right? So I think I was lucky for me. I love remote work and I think it's mentally a little hard to go back, I guess, to full time, in office. But given that stage where I was in, I worked with Paul Huffman, my current boss. Jack was one of the other guys. There's one more dude named Paul Cannon. He's leading a McDonald's search group right now. Our GM, Ben Lamarche, he leads Lock Search Group. So like all these were like literally in offices next to me.
Yeah.
So just by being in that environment, you learn so much. And then obviously they were very open to helping out. So like, we had open door policy and everybody there, even other associates helped me a lot sort of get up to speed. So I think it was just that environment that there wasn't one. We are lucky enough to have 4 or 5 really good recruiters who are always around and they've been recruiting forever. Like they're, one of the best recruiters, at least in Canada, right? If not the US as well. So I think I just got that. And I think you absorb things too, right? Like you absorb some things and then you ask them. And I think that just helped the first year be very, very interesting. And I think I learned the most from a recruitment perspective that, hey, this is how the speed, the urgency, the conversations, what
Yeah.
candidates really care about, what clients really care about, right? So I think that all that really helped me.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's definitely like drawbacks to remote work and there's drawbacks to being in office all the time, but definitely one of the positives of being in office is like you mentioned absorbing, being around like a bunch of killers in their profession. You're able to see how they do it. They teach you the ropes. That's one thing I try to really elicit in new grads to, hey, if you have an opportunity to maybe connect with a mentor or connect with someone a little older than you that can show you the way, to absolutely take that opportunity because you never know what's going to end up as well, right? Like even the employment opportunities that come from those relationships, you might not see it within the first 3 months, but when you're with someone for 1 year, 3 years, 5 years, it really can make a lasting effect.
Exactly. And I think as you sort of, especially in recruitment, right, you're talking to a lot of people. So the more you're in that, the more your network builds as well. And so if you're connected with the right people, for lack of a better word, I think it helps you grow your network without really trying to. So I don't think I've ever followed any LinkedIn tips of this is how you're supposed to network. I'm like, hey, like you and I connected. I'm like, okay, you know what? We're talking about a role, and then we kept in touch, and hey, today here we are chatting, right? So I think like some things do take time, but that just helped me a lot as well in the first, not just the first year, but anything after that. And I know I can call some people up if I'm confused or if I have doubts or whatever that is, right? at least they'll give me their viewpoints and help me out if they can. So I think that's a good safety net of sorts to have. And also, I always tell people, my first weekend after joining Log Search Group, there was the company business meeting in Mexico for 3 days. So that's probably the best thing you can get as a new hire, right? You're like, oh my God, all expenses paid trip with a bunch of guys and gals you probably like to hang out with. So I think that also maybe made a bit of a difference. I joke with my experience, with those guys.
I love that. And that speaks to how good company culture can be, right? Like you can really forge relationships with your employees if the employer is willing to take you somewhere, like a trip to Mexico. That's absolutely
Yeah,
incredible.
that was pretty fun. So yeah, I always throw that in.
It's funny talking about networking, and you mentioned kind of how we've stayed in touch over the years. We first met each other on LinkedIn. I was applying for a new role, and I believe you were the talent acquisition person on the role. So you reached out to me on LinkedIn, and we set up an interview. And then this was like just before COVID. This was like March 2020. I was going for an interview. This was like even like before masks and like the weird. We didn't know to shake hands or not to shake hands.
Sure.
Um, what was it like recruiting during that time of like March 2020 and going through COVID? Like, tell me about the craziness then and kind of what the craziness is going on now, because it seems like the job market is pretty wild again.
Yes, it was very interesting in the sense I still remember being in office and looking up at the news and there's like, hey, Italy's all closed down, right? I'm like, oh my God, how does the country close down? Little did I know in 3, 4 days following that, same thing would be happening in Canada. So I think safe to say, like nobody knew what was going on. I think businesses obviously just recoiled completely. Like I think we lost, I lost 90% of my open recs in that week. They're like, oh, sorry, it's on hold. And when you know something like this is happening, it's not on hold. It's pretty much canceled for the foreseeable future, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the things I learned at that time, irrespective of the business climate, there are a lot of candidates that we're talking to for these roles. Like, how do you let them know? How do you sort of acknowledge the time and effort they've put in, and it's completely out of their control? Because usually candidates are a bit more excited about starting a job than maybe an employer is getting a new hire, right? Because for businesses, it's part of what they do, but I think employees, it's obviously a bit more personal. So I think that's something empathy started creeping in at that point. Till then, I didn't really have much. I joke I probably still don't have too much, but that's when I started thinking a little bit more on the candidate experience side of things. Exiting a lot of people, as I call it, from the process, keeping them updated. Hey, if something does open up, right, we'll definitely keep you in mind, and just sort of following through with them as things went along, because obviously people got pretty desperate as things sort of started to unravel, and you would have even people you haven't spoken with for 4 3 years reaching out to you, or some people you've never spoken with. They're like, hey, for example, Alex told you had spoken with you about this role. Do you have something, right? So I think just finding the mental space to just respond to them and see if you can really help out, or just guide them. Hey, I'm not the right recruiter, maybe this person in my network, reach out to them. If you don't hear from them, let me know. I'm happy to do an intro, right? If it makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, obviously you have to be straightforward and be like, sorry, I just don't know anybody. And that's about that. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And then as businesses started to pick up again, hiring just went crazy, right? Everybody
Yeah.
wanted to hire yesterday. So I think that was the good period, I think, from a candidate perspective, recruitment perspective, we all went through. But I think the writing was on the wall that it's not going to last forever. Nobody thought, I think, it would be as it's not very bad right now, but it's just very slow, and it's very far and few between good roles are opening up. And with that, what's happened is you've got scarcity in good roles, tying up to, hey, a lot of people, good profiles, good individuals looking for jobs, and so most likely you still end up hiring from your own network. Like, if I have an open role, I'll probably know somebody, at least 3 or 4 people. All I have to see if they're available, and given how the markets have been, they're still available, right? So it's like, okay, then really posting a job, sure, you do post it because you still want to get some active pool. You do reach out to some, new people, because we do headhunt as well. But that effort might be a little lesser because we are still mining our own network. So if you're not in a certain network, if the recruiters don't know you that well, then chances, become that much slim, and then you've got referrals coming in left, right, and center, right? So you try to balance all of that. So that's sort of similarities between the COVID time and right now, in the sense hiring then stopped. I guess now it's pretty slow,
Mm-hmm.
and companies are very careful on how they go about it. And you've read the news, layoffs still keep happening. AI is there, and I think it's never going away now. So I think that's just going to increase in certain job sectors, certain industries.
Yeah.
But there are certain industries that are doing really well. Building materials, for one, like they are doing pretty solid. I think they have a good future. They have good, stable outlook for growth, and they're still hiring, but they also have a lot of options. So again, you're still competing, even though there might be good industries, but you're still competing against a lot of candidates who are probably as good, if not better, for that same exact role that you're vying for. So I think that's the similarities that have really come in.
100%. I think you made a good point when you're talking about the different industries. Some of them are recruiting a lot faster than other industries. Some of them are just growing financially faster than other industries. I tell some of my job seekers that, of course, let's say you wanted to get into tech sales, for example. Well, tech sales has been going through a lot of layoffs right now. Is there any sort of material goods that we can also position our skills to be a sales individual in that realm? So are you noticing, can you tell me about some of the industries that you see that are booming, some industries that you'd recommend job seekers to lean to, maybe in these tougher times?
Yeah, I would say like, going old school, going basic, like industries that are legacy industries, right? That don't really go through the ups and downs. I think those are the ones that are consistently hiring right now. So if you're doing healthcare sales, pharma sales, you're doing, for example, building materials, and these industries are very vast in themselves, right? I might say building materials, but that could mean flooring, that could mean cladding, that could mean your roofing, that could mean things that go, once you get a condo built, right? So there's so many little elements to it that you could go after. And generally speaking, what's happened is if you go on LinkedIn, if you go on Indeed, you go on Glassdoor, like Glassdoor probably not that great, but I think it still deserves a mention. You'll see that, majority of the jobs you'll come across the first 10, 15, 20 pages are the same big companies that you find, no matter what industry you're going in. So everyone's honing in for that. I always tell people if you are like go to good old Google, maybe even do yellow pages if you really want to find those list of companies, go to their career pages, drop in an email, make a phone call, and see what they have for you. Most likely than not, you'll probably, it's still more work, and that just has to be a part of your strategy, I would say. But that could help you break through the noise. And a lot of these companies are not getting featured on LinkedIn because they don't have the recruitment dollars to compete with the top 20 in their industry, right? So that's something I've noticed. Tech, etc. I think probably best to lay off for a bit just because there's a lot of talent in there, really good talent, a lot of innovation coming in there as well. The industry as well has struggled with high interest rates and whatnot, which obviously has put a huge dampener, I would say, on the whole job market, right? Because it's all tied with what the companies are planning to do. So I think those would be some industries I would definitely say and start keep an eye out on. You might not have considered them before, but even if you're talking local, that if you go in the GTA, Mississauga, it's like so many of those companies. You go Brampton, Scarborough's, like so many logistics companies, and both those areas, so many manufacturing companies, right? Could be electrical, could be some electronics, whatever that is. So anything of that sort is probably like more anything that ends up a consumer ends up using them, probably the right broad bucket to look at, and then you can figure out which exact, industry you feel you could be more successful in or have a better chance.
I couldn't agree more. I really feel like you do have to have a little bit of an understanding of the economy in a sense of which companies are going to be thriving so you can target your job search a little more specific opposed to being super broad and using that pray and spray method. I really liked how you mentioned cutting through the noise, sending an email, making a phone call. That's like almost at the crux of what I do as a career coach is give my client the confidence to pick up the phone, give my clients confidence to send the email, show them how to find individuals' emails, how to come across as not wanting, like, please, give me, I need a job. That doesn't sell too well.
Mhm.
How do you recommend someone to cut through the noise? And has anyone ever cut through the noise and reach out to you and you're impressed with their outreach? Could you share maybe an example of that?
Yeah, for sure. And I think relevancy is the biggest key here, right? Like you said, please, I'm great, etc. Yes, there's a human element to it, but I've yet to see a hiring manager in my 8 years be like, oh, just because this person needs a job so much, I'll probably end up saying yes, right? So I've had some of the most simplest outreach be like, hey, Alan, I saw you're recruiting for this. I'm interested. And because I'll usually always take a quick look, right? But they were so relevant, a simple message, cut through the noise. I'm like, hey, and they didn't apply for the job. They just saw that I was applying, like, I was recruiting for it. Maybe a post of mine, maybe saw the careers page, etc. Right? Because it's a lot of supply and demand. A lot of timing comes in as well, right? Some of the exciting ones I've seen, they usually refer to my tennis thing. That's an easy way to get me going. So this guy looked up all my information and is like, oh, I know this is an NCAA, pa pa pa. And even though he wasn't a fit, I'm like, yeah, I'll definitely talk to him because that just appealed to me as a person, right? I wouldn't say I don't exactly remember if I was able to help him that much, but we had a couple of good conversations. I was able to give him some target companies, industries, what I would do if I was in a situation, right? Give him some contacts with a LinkedIn recruiter. We use email finding tools and whatnot. So I have all those tools. I was able to share some info with him And like I said, I don't remember what happened, but yeah, so those elements come in, but I would say that's far and few between because with AI and everything, that's a bit more easier to do now. So for me, if I'm looking at from a purely business perspective, if you reach out, if you're reached out with something that's relevant, I'll always take time because that's what I do. It's my day in and day out to find the people that the hiring managers would go for. Like that's literally it if I remove all the fluff, right? LinkedIn, yes. Emails, sure. Calling me out of the blue, probably not going to work. I don't answer because so many spam calls coming in too now, right? So I mean, you're just blocked out of it. But I always say if you have my number, text me. It's like, hey, this is me. I want to talk to you. I'll take a look at that, but I'm not going to answer a random call in the day. But yeah, so those would be some examples. And I think to your initial question, Alex, like, how can you stand out? Is don't waste time chasing the wrong opportunities. I think the key is really finding out, and I tell people, find 10 jobs a week if you can.
A hundred
Focus on
percent.
that, and then you'll find ways to be relevant because it's not like one size fits all answer, right? So it's sort of like, do you reach out to the right person? Do you reach out to the manager? Do you reach out to somebody, depending on the company layout, like are they more in Toronto or is it like more like a national company? So like so many of those elements come in. Video outreach is something I tell people to do. It's pretty easy to do these days. You can, completely free. You can use Canva, Zooms, YouTube's, whatnot, right? So you can easily do that. I think that might help you stand out. But if you're not relevant, then you're just barking up the wrong tree. So let's make sure you're relevant off the bat and then tailor your strategy to it. And you can find scripts, right? Like you can go online, make it your own, basically get some pointers on how to, what to talk, how to present yourself, what to refer to, but get to the point fast. Like that's it. Like fast, 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 and relevancy, I think is probably the most important in today's market.
Absolutely. You said a few things that completely resonated with me. The 10 jobs a week, that's what I recommend. I tell my clients if you can operate Monday to Friday and Monday to Friday you can apply for 2, maybe 3 jobs a day that are relevant to you, that you've actually made a genuine connection with at least 2 or 3 people at the organization or tried to, that's going to yield the best response. I genuinely don't believe it's possible to apply for 100 jobs a day. Like when someone tells me I applied for
Mhm.
100 jobs today, I'm like, that's not possible. I'm like, tell me the last 3 jobs you applied for.
Fair enough.
I
Yeah.
don't know. I also say a job application cannot, or it can be, but submitted from a cell phone. I'm like, there's no way you're kind of haphazardly scrolling through LinkedIn and just like hoping to easy apply your way
Mhm.
to like $100,000 position. I'm like,
Yeah,
that
yeah, fair.
that's crazy, right? Like, I don't know. I feel like some people have different. I feel like people don't treat the job hunt with the respect that it deserves and with how much competition is out there. And I feel people kind of default to say, "Oh, the ATS system just completely kiboshed my application. My resume doesn't have
Mhm.
enough keywords." I've seen some people like even change the text to white on their resume to try to have
Yeah,
more
yeah,
keyword.
yeah.
Tell me about like some of the gimmicks you've heard, because I'm sure you've heard like the craziest ones. I'd love
No,
to
fair. That's
love
a
to
good
know.
point. So yeah, I'll just go back to the app board a little bit because we were talking about this because we ourselves are thinking of building a very interesting job board and how an app could tie into it, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things came up, and that's what I shared, and we sort of agreed upon that apps are good, but I've never applied. I've rarely applied for jobs, generally speaking, but whenever I have, I would never apply from an app. The only thing the app was good for is saving that job for later because when I'm in the TTC or something, right? Like there's only so much time we have in the day, and after working, you're probably not wanting to waste time, 2 hours looking for a job. So you're in the commute, stuff like that. I think that's the only thing apps are good for. But when you look at the job description and being in recruitment, seeing how picky things can be, it never made sense to be like, oh, I have this generic resume and Indeed, I'll just apply, or my LinkedIn resume. For some reason, someone's gonna take time to really, in their head come up with why I'm a fit for this role. Like that's my job to demonstrate the fit versus them having to find that out, right? So I always tell people use apps, probably save the good jobs you're looking for, and because apps also have a bit of a different algo than the computer, so hopefully that helps you, I guess, find something a bit more relevant. So I think that's where the apps I guess are useful, but that's about it. Or just killing time reading stuff on LinkedIn. I do that too from time to time, right? So I would say that. Gimmicks are very far and few, sort of between in the sense of meaning it's just fake stuff, right?
Yeah.
Usually, and the worst is when the resume says one thing, we have the tool, so I can go and see if the same profile exists on Indeed, if the same profile exists on LinkedIn, and they're not making sense at all, or it does make sense, and you talk to them, and they just don't even really know what's on their resume. You ask them a couple questions, and then they're faltering about it, right? They're like, oh, so which project did you work on, or what business unit were you supporting? Oh, you're telling me you did concrete sales. Okay, tell me a little bit about this restoration product that you have. And they have no clue. And I'm like, if I know more about it as a recruiter, as a sales or marketing, whatever you're talking about, you probably should know at least a little bit more than I do because I'm a recruiter. I'm not really selling those things. I'm not working in that business unit, right? That would be one. Second is, and I don't use them anymore because I think they're just pointless, but people sort of not putting in the right information on those mandatory questions. It's like how many years of this you have, or have you graduated? Do you have this educational background, or whatever that looks like? And they're like, oh yes, yes. And when you talk to them, oh sorry, or it could be as simple as location. Hey, do you live in Toronto? They're like, yes. Then when you talk to them, they're in Kitchener Waterloo. I'm like, yes, you could potentially make the commute, but the hiring manager is not going to take that risk. It's simple as that, right? So a lot of those simple things come in. Luckily, for me, I've never run into the issue that you mentioned. Hey, people putting like white font just to get through the game and whatnot. But I've seen keyword stacking, right? Like
Yeah.
all the keywords that you could think of are there, and then I guess there are some resume services coaches out there, and you can see the same format, same stuff, popping in again and again. I still would take a quick look if it's a good profile, just because there could be the right person who just got caught in the wrong service, right? The candidate could still be good, but then after looking at, I don't know, thousands and thousands of resumes, you don't have too much tolerance for some stuff, and then you're like, you know what, okay. And again, supply demand comes in, right? Like when the markets were tight, obviously, that there was more, sort of patience. But with the speed required to fill certain roles, things changing every time, I think it is upon us to also find the right candidates fast. And when you have like 1,000 people applying, some people we are reaching out, some people in our network, I think it's a very small bucket that might get selected through an application process. So you really want to be on top and not try to fool people because it's gonna come out. Like either if I don't catch it, somebody else will down the road. Like you're not fooling anybody, right? Really too much that you will lie your way to getting the job. So yeah.
Yeah. You said a few things there that I want to circle back to. One is the employer possibly taking a risk, right? Like if you're need to be in Toronto, but you live in Kitchener Waterloo, like that is a risk for the employer. And I don't think possible job seekers realize like why that's a risk or like what kind of risks there are out there with taking someone from a completely different industry. Like even though you're a killer in sales in tech, but now you want to go sell I don't know, some other goods or services, like yes, you were good in one vertical, but you might not be so good in another. Maybe talk about some of like the risks or the avoidance of risks that employers take.
No, that's a good question. There's not, I would say, like a very straightforward answer, but it comes down to if you haven't done it before, that itself brings a very big red flag. And again, having done it before is no guarantee that you'll probably be successful in a new role. But I think that's just human mentality that, okay, if they've done this for 3 years, if they've seen some success, the ramp time's going to be lesser. My budgets are probably going to be, my targets are going to be met quickly. I'm not going to waste my budget on having somebody for 6 months, having them ramp up, and then, oh my God, this is not working out, then I got to go back, find somebody else again, and that probably puts their job at risk as well, right? So I think that's where the risk avoidance really comes from. Uh, I don't think there's data specifically saying that people from the same industry succeed or people from different industries succeed, but I've seen very few successful transitions, right? And without talking about other industries specifically, if I talk about recruitment, especially on the agency side, it is rife for people leaving in the first 6 to 8 months. Because you come in, it's like thinking, hey, you're gonna, go volunteer at maybe a a homeless shelter, right? You're always thinking of the good things, but there are also some unpleasantries of the job that come along, right? So same thing with recruitment. You're always thinking, oh, I'm gonna help people find jobs. This is amazing. But that is just part of it. There's competition in it. There are other agencies you're competing with. There are clients you really want to work with. Clients change their mind. Budgets change. Candidates change their mind. So in 6 months, you could be like, oh my God, I just had a couple placements and I feel completely beat down. Now, if someone's been doing it for 4 to 5 years and have a book that of business that they can share or have some success that they can talk about, as a hiring manager, I know that they're prepared for it. Like they're also making an informed choice that they can succeed in this role versus, hey, I'm looking for a job and I think I can be really good at it, which you can completely be. I'm not saying you cannot be, but when I have 3 profiles and 2 of them are exactly what I'm looking for, and one tends to be a little bit of more of a risk, chances are I'll go with one of the two that I feel most comfortable, and then your personality fits in, and a lot of those other soft elements of the job also come in. And I've seen that extend across all industries, right? So when candidate clients come to us, and that's where I joke with people sometimes reaching out to recruiters who are not in your niche is probably a complete waste of time, because our job is usually we get 3 to 4 very non-negotiables that the client is looking for. Usually that is certain kind of experience, which amounts to years they've done the same role, certain, if it's a sales role, certain revenue targets that they've hit, the exact industry that they've hit, and probably even the same product or a very similar product or service line. So there, it's very niche down. So even though, let's say if I'm looking for somebody in roofing, and then all of a sudden you've done flooring, yeah, you've sold to end contractors. My client is looking for the distribution channel. Okay, is there an overlap? If there isn't, okay, that starts to not be the best fit, right? So I think for recruiters, especially agency recruiters, you really have to hone down on that best fit that you can find. And same goes for tech. Like there's cybersecurity, there's fintech. In cybersecurity, there's so much. There's endpoint management, and then there's a device management, and so much comes in. So those are really the niches that we go after when we're trying to get candidates. And so that's where people miss out. It's not really just moving from tech to building materials or building materials to construction. It's really that specificity of that particular job that they're trying to fill, and how do you fit into that. So if you're not hitting the top 3, 4 must-haves, uh, chances are slim, especially in a market like this. Like,
Yeah.
and sadly, I saw this trend, right? When the tech market was the first to sort of, burst in the last 2, 3 years, the very first people impacted were the people who were transitioning into tech. So you had a lot of teachers who were moving in, salespeople from different industries coming in. They all were the first ones to get cut just because ramp time was that much longer, money got that much more expensive, people stopped buying software, and then you just had the 10-year pros who've been doing it for a long time, who have that book of business, could be marketing, could be sales, could be engineering, could be whatever it is, right? Really, that those are the ones who have survived. And unfortunately, some of them also faced, redundancies because of things that kept happening. So that's the challenge, not so much jumping or moving from industry to industry, but what specific relevancy are you bringing? And if that's closer to zero, it is a little risky for everybody involved.
Yeah, I think some job seekers forget that there's a certain amount of requirements that a potential employer requires out of the next candidate that they'll be hiring. So you could have the best resume, the best profile, but if you don't have the 5 years of work experience that they state, you're going to be kind of looked over, right? And they might be thinking, oh, well, is it my resume? Is it my profile? Is it this? It's just simply the fact that, hey, you had 3 years of experience, you didn't have the five, and that's kind of the situation.
Yep, and also I think quickly to add, I get this on LinkedIn a lot. Hey, I applied to the job and the hiring manager is not from this industry, but how come they are there and surviving and they're not hiring anybody from outside this industry, right? Usually what happens also I've noticed is they're also trying to fill gaps, right? You hire, let's say you have to build a team of 10 engineers. You start with the first hire. That's probably the easiest to get in usually because the budget is the max. They still have a lot of open positions. But once you make the first hire, some requirements are met. They're like, okay, so now we're looking for 20 things. Now with this hire, we have allocated this much budget and we already have this requirements met. So now we only have this much. So as you keep going, it doesn't really matter if the hiring manager is not from the industry, but everyone who's not from the industry always tell me that it was really difficult for them to catch on to it. And so for them also, it's like if the other person does not show that same grit, determination, whatever that they themselves had, and that's where it becomes super subjective. So they're like, rather than having that bias creep in, how about we stick to the basics? People have done it, have some success, can really get hit the ground running, right? So I think that's one element I've seen on LinkedIn come up a lot. And it's naturally just trying to fill the gaps because what are you going to do with the same kind of people again and again if you don't really have that need? So I think it could be important for job seekers to keep that a little in mind.
That's so interesting. I find it very fascinating that a job seeker will kind of do the due diligence, look at the manager, be like, "Hey, they're not from that industry. Why are they not? Like, is there some favoritism? What's going on?" It's funny how people can kind of jump to conclusions in senses like that. I have a question for you. ATS. Tell me about the ATS. I feel like I've never heard more about ATS since like probably 2023 started. How much weight does the ATS have in the application process? Is there an AI vetting resumes for keywords or terms, and that's going to be selecting the resume that gets through? Tell me about that. I'm sure that people would love to hear.
No, fair enough. And without naming names, I've used, pretty much all the ATSs out there, right? In my span, I've seen them develop as well. Some of the very original ones that came in, started being more aggressive in this field about 5, 6 years ago, right? And obviously last 2 years, I've seen a huge boom of the ATS conversation. I cannot really speak for what other recruiters do, but my team and how we approach it, right? There is no AI. There's nobody screening off your resumes. There's nothing of that hocus pocus that's out on LinkedIn that auto rejections are happening. Yeah, it could be an auto rejection if you don't meet the basic requirement. Like LinkedIn has a function that if I'm hiring in Canada, if somebody from outside Canada applies, they can auto reject the candidate. I wouldn't say that's AI. That's just basic, Q&A and a very, very location basic requirement not being met, right? Other than that, yeah, if you do answer wrong on the pass and fail, unless you've really set up that system like that, they still stay in the pile. They just won't be in your, maybe AI can help you with your top relevant candidates based on keywords, et cetera, et cetera. Not every ATS does that, right? So you can say that's an AI play. I think that's more like keywording. Again, it's not necessarily artificial intelligence. They're just looking at that. And LinkedIn does the same thing when you apply for jobs. It's going to show you, hey, your top relevant candidates. And sometimes they're not relevant at all, right? So as a good recruiters, we know that that's not something we can depend on. So we might play with our own keywords if we have to, but more likely than not, it is the sort of companies you've been with, right? So let's say if you have worked with Salesforce and I'm looking for a salesperson, and we all know what Salesforce is. So if I know my hiring manager would keen to have somebody who's maybe been through the Salesforce good process, that's what literally I'm going to search. I'm just going to put Salesforce in the applicant pool. I'll see who else popping up. And let's say based on the current market, if I find five, six people, unfortunately, that could mean other candidates don't get even looked at, right? So again, that depends on recruiter to recruiter. Sometimes I'll go through all the applicants, I'll manually screen them. How good or bad my screening is, I think that there's no, data on that, but I think I've been doing a decent enough job over the years, right? Could I probably miss somebody? Sure. That's why I say be relevant, be fast, be to the point. Because if I see something that's of interest and if the job description already has that information, it's not hidden information. It's there on the job description. Make it relevant. That will make me pause. That will make me look. That will make me at least shortlist you. And then I'll probably go through, my let's say top 20 shortlist and be like, okay, these are the 10 I want to talk to, right? And then sort of go from there. But there's no magic in beating because you can't beat the ATS because there's nothing to be beaten. All it's taking is taking an application, putting in that correct job that it should sort of be in, and then we can sort by relevancy, we can sort by date, and maybe there's one more random feature. But I usually just go sort by date, and I'll just start going because I do keep my pipelines pretty clean. So I'll be looking at it every second day or third day, right, give or take on how it goes. So I'll always start from the last one. But you could be an amazing candidate, perfect for the job. Let's say the hiring process is going on, they're close to making an offer, they found the person. Usually, the hiring team would not have the capacity to go back through the process and go through it all again unless that changes. So you might feel, oh, I applied and I got a rejection really quickly. Well, it was just not the good timing. So rather than the ATS rejecting, it's usually some human and could be somebody who's not even in recruitment, could be an admin. They're like, oh, the role's closed, we're going to close this role, and automatically everybody just gets a standard, hey, sorry, whatever the verbiage is, right? So I think that's what it is. But all these people talking about beating the ATS and all that stuff, I'm like, great. I would like to know more, but there's really isn't a magic trick, I would say there.
I'm so glad you say that. I have some people that come to me either with a resume that's been written by another resume writer or career coach, and they said, "Hey, like I was told this resume always beats the ATS 80% of the time," and like, but they have all these crazy numbers and accolades about how it's going to beat the ATS, and is your thing ATS friendly? And I feel sometimes people try to load their resume with so many keywords and so much ATS jargon that there's no factual tasks that they've accomplished or no like
Mm-mm.
quantifiable skills that they put on the resume because they're just cramming it with essentially stuff to beat the ATS.
Exactly. The only tip I tell people is do a PDF if you can, because obviously that keeps the formatting right. Not a lot of us depend on the parsed information that is in the ATS, because again, that can be way off. But if it's a Word doc or something, like those things can go completely crazy. So, but this is old school information, right? Use a PDF, keep it simple, black and white is fine, unless you're going for a very creative job application or something, or that's how the job role is. Like, nobody needs logos and nobody needs color. Like, make it easy for us to read. And, hopefully if it is a fit, we'll reach out because no one's not wanting to hire anybody, right? And that's why I think recruiters get a bit of a flack that for us, it's really, and the hiring manager can change their mind. 2 weeks ago, the profile was different. They spoke with a couple of people. They realized, well, this is the gap. They spoke with their leadership. They're like, yeah, we might want to change the profile. So you all could have been really good 2 weeks ago, but now, because the hiring profile has changed, all of a sudden you're no longer the right fit. And then we have to move on, right? So I think those elements, I think it's a very living, breathing process. It does not start and end with a job description or a job ad. And a lot of, I think, job seekers, because unfortunately they don't get the visibility, feedback is obviously being feedback rarely provide it for legal reasons or whatever reasons. It's maybe because it's not mandatory, right? Really, people rarely provide feedback. So I think that's where the uneducation in the job application process is running rampant. When you have people, and I've seen people be like, I don't know, I mean, land your dream jobs, get 3x salary increases in 30 days. I'm like, if you could do that, I would be the first person to recommend people to you, right? But that's just not how it works. But unfortunately, I think that's where the misinformation is really, getting to people now.
Exactly. And to be honest, like even reflecting, like as a career coach, like, I love to post my client wins online. But I have some clients, like for full transparency, that take 7 months to find a new role,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it just takes that time. Depends on the industry, depends on your background, depends on your work experience. There's so many different factors, but you have to keep showing up, and then essentially have a resume that you're proud of, that works. You ran it by a few confidants and confident people that you trust, and just keep kind of playing the game, if you will. I really try to look at it as a game, be thoughtful with it, track your applications and what you're applying to, and just have a purpose with each application. Don't do that spray and pray method.
Exactly.
Um,
Have a system. Could be simple. Could be an Excel sheet. That's what I tell people. Like, or Google, like I use Google. So use a Google sheet. These are the folks I applied to. These are the folks I connected with, whatever. And see, and always look back at stuff you've done, right? Don't apply and just move on. Like, look back at it. Maybe have, I don't know, 4 hours in a week set aside when you're tired of applications. Hey, I applied to these 20 jobs. What's happening with them? Has something changed? Can I find, like, just sort of, and especially if you're applying sales, because I do a lot of sales marketing now, because the engineering, IT is being IT, and developers, unfortunately, being the most impacted by AI and all that stream. So especially if you're looking for sales roles and stuff, like you need to be persistent. Like that's going to be your job, like breaking through the noise. So I think it behooves you, if you don't really keep track of your application, see if there's another way to multi-channel the conversation. Just get in front of somebody. Maybe something else comes down the road. I think and I know it's hard to do it if you're looking for a job. I completely understand that.
mhm.
But if I remove the emotional element from it, end of the day, it is a cold, job search process. That's how it is. And you have to, I guess, be ready to game it. And, hopefully you're able to find the right position, for yourself. And that gives you your career, right? So yeah.
It is very emotionally draining, and you can't take the rejections personally. Like when you get that auto rejection email, like I've had some clients just dwell on it, call me, and rightfully so. Like their livelihoods depend on having a job. So I completely get where they're coming from. But we can't spend 3 hours being absolutely torn apart and defeated because we got rejected. Keep going, pick yourself up, and it's going to happen eventually. Um, a,
Exactly.
a few more questions for you here. I've noticed a lot of individuals, like since COVID, they've either had like a break in their resume, they've been laid off, or they tried some freelance work. Can you tell me, how much does freelance work or a gap in the resume, how does that play out when you're looking at a possible candidate?
Very good question. Not a very straightforward answer again, but I would say gaps, unfortunately, are still looked down upon, generally speaking, if not by recruiters. And again, it's never the recruiter, it's always the hiring team. Because again, if the hiring team's like, hey, listen, if I know how the job market's been, and I'm okay with, if the candidate has a gap, if they're a good fit, worth a chat, right? So again, it does come down to being how good of a fit you are. If you're a really good fit and if you have a gap, no one's going to care, because everybody knows what's happening. But the further away you get away from that being that really good fit, that's when the gaps, and that's when like it's basically a process of elimination, right? No one's being like, oh, well, let's include everybody and find jobs for these 100 applicants. It's more like, hey, we have this one job, so everyone's job is to hopefully find the best person. And I guess for lack of a better system or process, it does come down to elimination. You're just eliminating people at every stages. So gaps do tend to be tricky, I would say, in general. Freelancing is really good as long as it's something that's relevant, I would say. Or maybe if there's a good personal story, you wanted to do something, and you had the bandwidth, maybe you had the financial, freedom to be like, hey, 1 year I did something I was really passionate about, and I'm ready to get back into freelancing work. I think that's good. That do a lot of things, but then unfortunately, when you really dig into it, there's nothing they can show that they've freelance or put your. But I would say freelancing you may work on some projects that could be sensible You maybe help a small client or whatever that looks like. But I would say freelancing, yes, definitely a good thing to put.
Fantastic, fantastic. Because I have some clients that have either decided to kind of take a break or try their own thing, and they get really concerned when they enter the job market again, and they have that freelance. They call it a freelance gap essentially because they don't have no employer vouching for them. It's their own accord. They made their own sales or driving their own business. So sometimes they get concerned about having that on the resume. Two more questions for you. When you're interviewing an individual, how long do you typically take before you realize this person's going to be a good fit, or they might not be a good fit? Do you have a good vibe checker, or do you have anything you look out for?
This is not going to be the right answer, but usually in the first couple minutes, because if I'm chatting with you, the document did make sense for me to reach out to you. Your LinkedIn checked out, or Indeed checked out, whatever that is. So there's a very specific reason I'm chatting with you, and because I'm pretty transparent in who I'm recruiting for, what the role entails. Like I'm very upfront with a lot of things. And again, depends on the roles, right? Depends on the personality required. Like, software devs will have a different personality than a sales rep, right? Like, and that's where the subjectivity of it comes in. So I would say very quickly, yes, I don't think, like I said, it's probably not the best way to do it. So there are, certain things we do when we are talking to people. Maybe they're just not a good starter, right? Or maybe they're busy with something and just jumped onto this call. So that's the reason, even though you might be certain the first 2 minutes that, hey, this person is the right fit, they'll probably still have at least a 15-minute conversation, give or take. Because you want to give them the chance. Because again, it's not about who said it first. It's about actually finding, are you a good fit or not, right? But let's say if after multiple prompts, you're still not sort of talking along the conversation that would make sense, then unfortunately, it sort of is not going to go in your direction. But I would say most of the battles can sort of be started winning or start being lost in the first 2 or 3 minutes, and how you show up for the calls and stuff like that.
Absolutely. And then similarly with the resume, how long do you typically look at a resume before you say, okay, this is someone I want to bring in for an interview, or I might have to move on to the next resume?
A huge caveat again. So let's say it can take me less than 2 seconds if I have to. If there's the sales role in cybersecurity with UEM experience I'm looking for, and if you're a sales role at PayPal, I know that's a fintech company, nothing to do with UEM. You could have been there 10 years. I know the hiring manager's not going to go for it, right? So I'm probably going to move on. But then if you're from I don't know, I'm just going to think of a name here, SolarWinds, like they do stuff like that, right? Or Darktrace. So one of those companies that will make me pause. The thing is, it's not about how fast I guess anybody looks at the resume, because if it's relevant, I'll spend 10 minutes. Like that's definitely, because that's time well spent versus trying to force myself to find a fit. So Alex shows up on my applicant tracker and he's like, okay, he's done this. I'm like, cool, quickly open. I'll probably shortlist you. If you're real, and the best resumes or the best people are, when I look at it, I'm like, that creates scarcity in my mind because I know my competitors are hiring for same positions. So now I'm going to probably stop everything and reach out to you if I'm that certain that this person is definitely worth a first conversation. And if that chat goes well, just based on the resume, and again, it's not about the words you put in, it's what you've done, where you've been, what you've achieved. So it's not like fancy English or AI driven templates that really drive it, but really depending on the role, how is that fitting? And those were the three things I'll look at, right? And then I'm like, okay, I'll reach out to you right now. I'll drop everything, reach out to you, try to have a conversation. The lesser the fit, then you start moving. Hey, these are in my, top 20 pile. I'll look at them. But if you're not into it, it can be 2 seconds because all I need to see where you've been. I don't really need to know what you've done because the hiring manager's not going to go for it. And then realistically, I'm wasting everyone's time, even, trying to have that conversation.
So true. So true. Alan, you've been so real. I really appreciate all the advice, all the feedback, all the tips and insights you provided. Is there anything that you want to end off with or leave the people with?
Yeah, I would just say, just sort of recap something you said, right? Like, don't get disheartened. It is a tough economy. It is just what it is right now. It's probably going to take a year at least. Let's say elections in the US happening, the interest rates. I think those things are really driving the macro conditions. You could be the best candidate and you probably have seen success very easily before, right? If you're new coming into the job market, you're a recent grad, don't get disheartened. You might have to struggle a bit more. Hopefully things change. It probably, I think, it's anecdotally probably here because bad things have to end, I guess, at some point, right? Markets have to rebound. So don't take it too personally, but also, on that vein, don't get too desperate and fall for anybody trying to sell you some things that, sound too good to be true, because you'll lose money there, right? You'll lose time, you'll lose, your efforts, you'll probably be more dejected. And if you don't have the right support group, you might even, beat yourself up a bit more. You're like, oh my God, I spent all this time, I worked with a coach, I did this, I did that, and I still don't have a job, right? So that would be one part. And the second is be relevant. Be relevant, be quick. There's no place for fluff. If you're a good fit, everybody from the woodwork will come out to hire you. Like that's what we all do for a living, right? But if you're not a good fit, maybe it's a dream company, but they just don't have the role for you, move on. Like, don't waste time trying to break into a company that just does not have a need for your particular skill set. I think that will help you avoid a lot of the emotional, um, you know, swings that would go along with a job search.
Absolutely. And there's definitely going to be emotional swings. So being able to set yourself up to be resilient is definitely going to be key to that success. Awesome. Alan, this has been fantastic. I hope you have a fantastic day, and we should do this again in the future.
No, for sure, Alex. Thanks a lot. And I've seen good stuff about you on LinkedIn. So yeah, hopefully you keep it up too. And then yeah, I'll ping you if something comes up.
Appreciate it. Cheers, Alan.